Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Headlines. My name is Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Hazreen Hassan. Today, we first take a look at the recently announced Bumiputra Economic Transformation Plan 2035, or Putra 35, launched by Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim. This ambitious plan is designed to elevate Bumiputra development and position Malaysia as a regional economic leader, all while ensuring inclusivity and equitable growth across the nation.
We'll also discuss the government's recent announcement of a phased salary hike for civil servants up until 15%, that is, the first significant increase since 2012. Now, while this move aims to address wage disparities and boost morale, it also raises pressing concerns, especially when it comes to economic viability, long-term sustainability, and the broader impact on the private sector. Now, to help us unpack these critical issues, we have with us Professor Dr. Bajawai Badai. Welcome, Professor, to Beyond Headlines.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Now,
Very pleased to have you on the show with us today. And also, Amalina, today with us we have Corston Smith, founder and author of We Are All Stakeholders, Datuk Shireen and Zaharah Muhiudeen, who's here to talk about online harms and the urgent need for concerted efforts to protect the mental health and safety of our children in the digital age later on in our second segment. Datuk, welcome to Beyond Headlines.
Thank you for having me. If you don't mind, I'd rather just be Shireen.
Okay,
of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, welcome to the show, Shireen.
pleasure
Thank
to
you.
have you,
Pleasure
Shireen.
to have you here, yes. So, Shireen, just very shortly, you've been a long time strong advocate of corporate governance best practices and environment, social and governance, or ESG as it's more commonly known. And now, today, on internet safety, particularly when it most affects our young ones, this call to action is absolutely necessary, isn't it? It's almost overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what people don't realize is that when you look at the ESG framework or the sustainability framework and you look at, environment gets a lot of headlines today, and rightly so. Governance has always been part of the needed or the requirements for any markets to move forward because you need transparency in processes. Now, the S portion, which can be various aspects within it, you do have the S, which includes safety and online safety. And today, when you look at some of the issues we're facing societies where you have so many people who are very angry. There's a lot of hate now. And of course, then there are the children. How are the children growing? How are they dealing with all these mental health issues? And these are some of the things that I'm going to be talking about that has really pushed me to launch an online safety impact fund, because I feel that this is something we really need to start creating awareness. It'll be a different type of fund, but it is something that needs to be done.
Right. Internet safety has never been more important. The internet can be such an unforgiving place, especially for children, aside from the more obvious risks such as online bullying, grooming, or device addiction. The way that children are engaging with the online world means that we have to take stock of their mental health and well-being, the type of content that they are consuming and what they're posting online, which is why empowering parents and everyone else too is essential in these more modern and sophisticated times. So first, Datuk, can you share with us what this call to action to empower parents and nations in the digital age entails?
Let me just give you a little bit of a background of how this all came into my investment radar. Possibly about 16, 17 years ago, I was speaking in South Korea, and I met two global leaders, one from the United States and one from New Zealand. And before we went up on the stage, they asked me, do you have any children? And I said, well, I have two young girls. And they said, whatever you do, be very mindful of social media that's coming on stream at the time, because it's very damaging to young girls. I then went back, or came home to Malaysia, and my late mother, who's a pediatrician, who is always very interested in ensuring proper cognitive development, ensuring children read, was one of the things that she felt very strongly about. And I spoke to her about these issues, and we had, she had a very clear policy of no screens to any child until 3 years old, because it impairs cognitive development. And what we could see just from, our friends and around us is that many people hand a phone to a child in order to keep them entertained, not knowing the damage that it's doing to children. So this is how I sort of fell into looking at this issue. And then when we looked at COVID, some of the more, the schools with more resources were providing online school.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had online homework. And what was very clear is that more and more kids were becoming fatigued with screen usage.
Right.
And we had screens for a very long time compared to many parts of the world. So with that, I started looking at some of the impact on some of the children, even adults during COVID, which pushed me into analyzing and almost going into a research project on what was happening globally. I then also saw, which was very worrying, is some of my own friends' children, they started self-harm. And by this, the little sharpener with the little blade, they would take that out and then they would just cut themselves. And
But to meet a challenge or to...
it could be for any reason.
Right.
Sometimes it was they didn't like their bodily image. Some of it was for a challenge. Some of it was bullying. And I couldn't understand why there were more and more, especially young girls, but it's not only the young girls, who were doing this. Why were they harming themselves? Why were they so angry with how they looked? I mean, this is, of course, many women are always under pressure, because of the way that, the films are, the magazines are, everybody looks so fantastic. And then when you have, the launch of the internet, people have their internet life, right? They show the best part of their life, and some people look at it and they feel that they have such a rotten life because, this person is in this fancy spot or eating fancy food or whatever it is.
Yep.
So this is where my research really started to take shape. I then started seeing more and more very tragic, deaths. Even families couldn't even have an extension cord in their house for fear that the children will use it. I mean, it was getting that bad. So with that, many parents are not aware of how dangerous the internet is.
Yeah.
I then started to look at the global leaders, and I was very fortunate through my US friends, and after writing my book in the US, to reach out to one of the, she's not alone in highlighting these issues, but I was able to speak to and interview Frances Haugen.
Right.
And Frances was able to explain to me some of the areas that, as parents, we need to know, and we don't know. And we are up against thousands of engineers who are designing apps or AI to keep us on the screen. And you may ask, why is that so important? Well, it comes down to money. So basically what happens is that the longer you're on the screen, the more the advertisers will pay the app provider. It's not a subscription model, so people are not subscribing to it. It's all free.
Watch time. That's the prime the monetary value. There,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
And so you have children or even young adults, teenagers, who then are able to create some sort of sensational story. People follow it,
Yep.
and then they become an influencer. And then the ADEX or the advertisers will go to them and pay them to advertise their product. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And how do you get people to follow you? Sometimes it's so outrageous. We had a case here with some of the schools as a parent. This was a few years ago. And it was a tragic event that they started, having photographs of some of their schoolmates. They then circulated it. And then you had pedophiles involved in this. So we are faced with very serious problems with our children. We cannot ignore this. We cannot think that it's not hitting our shores. We have to talk about it. We have to have these conversations. I don't think there's anybody in this country who's not worried about their children, their choo-choo, their nieces, nephews. Everybody's worried about it because the fights that go on in families about the phone, about the screen, is incredible. Sleep deprivation. We already talked about being on screens all day for school and having to do homework online. All these things caused fatigue. Now you're having children who are going to bed at 12, 1, 2. Ridiculous hours. They're not sleeping properly. And then they go to school and they're tired. They're unable to learn. I think, Prof, there was this recent announcement that 10,000 children did not take the SPM.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, you ask yourself, what are we doing wrong? We need to get people back into education. We need to get people excited to be wanting to read books. So with this, I feel that we need to have these conversations. We need to have the education. AI is moving so fast. We need to know what exactly AI is being pushed to us. We need to know, now they're coming into the deep fake, where they are cutting your head off and they're putting it on somebody else's body. They're using your voice to call people to say, online scam, please send me money. Before it was just a text. Now it's your voice. Now it's your face. They're getting more and more sophisticated. And if you look at some of the violence that we've seen in countries, for, the way that it's portrayed, the way that they portray a photograph, the way that they portray a photograph and then they, focus on certain parts of it just to stimulate anger, stimulate fear, that we are seeing more and more of this all over the world.
That is true. That is true. So what's the first step then, Shireen? I think for number one, the parents, so obviously here is a big factor in all of this, to make sure that that they can safeguard their children properly accordingly. But what's the first step here, especially towards education of the general public?
What's going on? Well, I think that there are a few steps I feel, but I'm not the expert. I've just done a lot of research. But the first few things is, of course, when they're very small, till the age of 3, do not give them a screen. If you want your children to read, give them storybooks.
Right.
Find those storybooks, put them on the floor, let the child go and pick up that book. So that they get used to turning the page, they get used to reading, and you should also be reading to the child. Anybody should be reading so that they hear it. The second thing that I've learned is that parents need to know they're not alone. They have to know that they are up against all these AI engineers who are designing apps to keep you online. So you can't feel that this is just your failing as a parent, which is normally what we feel. The minute our child doesn't do something right, you think it's my fault. Actually, this is something that's happening everywhere. You speak to most parents anywhere in the world, they'll say, oh my goodness, if you have a teenager or a young child, even 10-year-old children now are worried about skincare. I mean, it's unheard of.
But that's what the social media has brought us, right? I mean, it has influenced us into thinking that we are not enough in that sense. That's the digital, I suppose, addiction that we face ourselves. But it's hard to block. It's hard to block this sort of like transformative kind of power.
Well, I think, one of the things that I've learned is that there's something, in the United States, Silicon Valley, where all the billionaires, the big tech boys, what are they doing differently? Well, sadly to know, those people, those very, very wealthy people, schools don't allow phones. They absolutely do not allow phones until the 8th grade. So, when you have kids who are not allowed a phone until they're 14, 15, some states are even talking about 16, this will dramatically change things. Of course, some parents say, oh, it's a safety, things like that. But you don't need to be on the phone all the time, or you could just, I understand now phones are being made where you can just do parent to child phone call message, no surfing the internet. I mean, these are some of the things. Of course, I do feel that now the conversation has started. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I was able to meet Francis.
Right.
I'm so grateful that I was able to speak with Professor Taylor Owen, who he himself has led commissions where they have talked about the governance of online, they call it online harm, and how we can start having, grouping together so that we can then look at these issues and share resources across countries. Because the tech giants are so powerful, they're almost as powerful as some countries. And that's what's worrying. And at the end of the day, you talk about ESG, you talk about sustainability. How much of these tech giants are taking this into account?
Right.
The damage that is happening. When you see some of the recent developments in the United States with where they've called some of these tech giants in, you'll see parents there who have lost their children because of social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we recently had our I suppose, unfortunate incident with the TikToker that committed suicide, and then the offender was only left with just ringgit fine because
A slap on the wrist.
yeah,
really.
slap on the wrist because of our, I suppose, the punitive actions are not necessarily great yet, and this is where the update needs to be really looked into. You mentioned about Francis, right? He's supposed to come here soon, sometime
Correct.
in September.
Yeah, so I'm really happy that I was able to do that introduction to bring Francis and Professor Taylor to the key decision makers so that they can hear how to shape this and how to shape the conversations. Because next year, Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN. ASEAN is 600 million people. When you have 600 million people speaking as a voice, or even, Malaysia has the other advantage is that we're part of Commonwealth. So being part of ASEAN, being part of Commonwealth, and you see with the developments in Canada, you're seeing the developments in Australia. I know there's some in the United Kingdom, although they're going to be addressing them after what's happened in London. I think that we need to come together. We need to have these conversations, shape what we need to say so that we can go to these big tech giants and say, look, what safety measures do you have for us? Your safety measures, if any, are in English and American English. We have so many dialects. We have so many languages across the region.
Right.
In Malaysia, in East Malaysia, they're all different. And all those racial slurs and hate speech is able to get through because there's no stopping them. And this is what needs to be addressed. So if I go back to your question about parents, I think for parents, somehow or other, they need to start this movement within their schools about no phones till a certain age, at least to 14, 15. We need to try and make sure that parents are able to, or maybe this is something for conversation when they have the conference, is to talk about how can we monitor to see how many kids are actually online at 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and where are they residing? And I do think that these are the conversations these experts will bring to us, and how can we address it, how can we monitor it,
Right.
and how can we prepare for next year so that Malaysia leads this. I think that we're in a perfect position to do it, and we need to do it.
So people like Francis is instrumental really for us to learn from, and this conference couldn't come any sooner, right?
Yes, and Professor Taylor, because he's
Right.
actually helped draft laws. So I think that these conversations are going to be very useful. I hope that many parents are able to watch the conference or follow up on the media coverage, because it's going to be educational also for journalists and also for those influencers on the internet, where they're going to start to realize that they need to start asking some questions.
Right. And the conference in question here is set by the Legal Affairs Division, or also known as BAYU, under Datuk Sri Azalina's ministry, in collaboration with MCMC and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. They are organizing the International Legal Conference on Online Harm, set to take place September 5th and 6th.
Yeah, very soon.
Yeah, very soon. So, I mean, I suppose from this particular engagement, Dato' or Shireen, what are the expected outcomes, apart from what you just mentioned, that we need to really look into a certain bill per se that needs to be?
Yes, I think there
taking
is talk of that, although, I'm not in a position to, I'm not with the government and I'm not a lawyer, but I do think that there will be some areas, as you correctly pointed out, that the tragic death of the TikToker and the fine for somebody who had caused it was so low.
It's like an oversight.
Well, no, I think the thing is that the internet has moved at such a rapid speed, and we have these providers from various countries. So we've got influence from the United States through theirs, and we've got influence some Russian-owned, China-owned. So, and one of the downsides is, of course, the speed of the internet. The faster our internet is, the more people are able to watch things in a shorter time. So, when you're actually on a slow internet, it has some advantages, because people just don't have the patience. Now people read something, they read a few lines, and they think that they know what's going on. They don't want to read the whole article. They just want to read snippets. So I'm hoping that these conversations that are going to take place shortly are going to really spur the development of what we need, which is some regulation on platforms, so that if people create such, devastating impact on another individual, there's something that we can do about it. Because right now, whether children are, with this deep fake, are being harmed, and many of them don't know what to do. They're already young. They can't deal with it. They feel there's something wrong with them. I was just listening to how they have this new app, which you can put your face into, and then it will change the app to suggest to you what kind of plastic surgery you should do.
Right.
And this is for young children. I mean, 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds. I couldn't imagine of anything worse.
Right. Right. I mean, just to sort of be fair, right? Because you mentioned regulation, and obviously this is going to be there's going to be a lot of talk about creating new laws, right, to make sure that everything is all in place. But a lot of people have also argued that with more regulations, we're taking away some of the freedom
Of choice.
freedom of choice, speech, to express yourself. I mean, that is really what the internet's all about, isn't it? That people can really say what they want.
It's like a symbol
So-
of liberty. Of
But
sorts
how would
sometimes.
you counter that in terms of you're advocating for safety, and I know that which is important. But how would you counter the argument? Well, it shouldn't be at the expense of our freedom and right of expression.
I don't think that this is one or the other.
Okay.
I really don't. And I think that this is what the experts are going to share. It is not about you're not allowed to express yourself. But for example, there are certain civil laws, criminal laws that you're not allowed to do, right? It's the way society behaves. So you're allowed to drive a car, you're allowed to open a bank account, but you're also not allowed to go and knock somebody over and just walk off, right? And you're not allowed to open a bank account and then, keep on running into debt and then just walk away. So I don't think that it's one or the other. I do think that this is where, Professor Taylor and Francis And the other speakers who are coming in are going to share the experiences of what's happened in Canada, in Australia. And hopefully we will then be making the right decisions, taking all their knowledge so that we don't have to go through other mistakes, because we've got to catch up.
Right.
And because AI is moving so fast,
Right.
we need to be at the forefront of this.
Right.
And we can't say, oh no, this is going to curtail, therefore we can't look at it. We have to look at it. Otherwise, our future of our children, who will be the next generation, and Professor who's worried about income, we're going to have a huge amount of money that's going to be spent on mental health, because people are going to be so depressed and so angry.
Right. We have to wrap up. I'm so sorry to rush everyone, but I do want to touch on this particular question, because you did mention Malaysia's going to chair the next ASEAN summit, right? But what better than to lead by example, right? First, to kind of spur or set the discourse, get everyone involved. But it takes a leader to also influence the members of within the region to also be on board in this particular, not say fight against digitization, but ensuring a safety net for the users, right? How can we be better leaders in this context?
Well, I think that the first step is, of course, to have these conversations. We need to have the robust conversations, and we need to share our culture and our cultural experiences, and they need to share theirs. And we need to find a match, right, within our own legal structure, and we need to do that within the region.
Right.
We need to have the conversations about safety in language. We need to have the conversations about children using phones, ages of children signing up for apps. You know, they all say that you're only supposed to be a certain age when you sign up an app, but surely if somebody is an 8-year-old and they're searching up certain type of age cartoons, you would know they're an 8-year-old and not a 16-year-old, as they've said. You know, there's got to be something. And I do feel that this is what these experts are going to be able to do. They're going to be explain their stories. And hopefully these conversations will then empower us to do what we need to be done. And then next year, we champion this. We champion it with all the other countries, because it's not just us who's facing this. Everybody is facing it. I mean, look what happened in London.
That's right. Well, yeah, that's the price you pay, really, for the very global and interconnected world that we live in here.
So, Prof, what about you? What do you make of the advancement in technology, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence here?
Yes, I think AI is here to stay, and it will be penetrating it through every aspect of our life. And it can benefit us, for example, in this early childhood education. We know that there's some parents that cannot afford to send their children to the nursery. Why don't we create artificial intelligence, and we can use robotic and so on, and design a system that can be affordable and can be used by everyone in the society, household, especially in the remote area, household that are disadvantaged, for example.
But it has to have a certain level of, I suppose, SOP, right, to know to ensure that it's not being abused.
Yes, of course. Yes. I mean, today, we in the academic are fighting against AI in education, because
You've got ChatGPT.
Yes.
You've got data
because our
analytics.
students are using ChatGPT to cheat us in answering the exam question. But we tell ourselves that we have to be better than AI.
Well, I think I need to be clear. I'm not saying that we need to not do it. I'm just saying we need to be in control.
Yes.
We need to know what is AI, what is not, what's a deep fake, because of the implications it's having on society. So yes, it's here to stay. Nobody's asking it to be stopped. Nobody's asking it to be closed down. But we need to know, and we have the right to know. And that's the key thing. And our kids and teenagers and financial scams, and in some places, there's racial violence. All these things we need to know, is this real? Is this just being instigated?
Yeah.
So I mean, and that's the point. And if we don't have the conversations, then you can't have, well, I'm just going to close it down. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But what you do need to do is you need to have the safety measures.
There's a
It's
certain level
inevitable,
of
really.
yeah, and a
Yeah.
certain level of responsibility that we must consider as well, especially with everything within our grasp, right? Everything within our reach, in that sense.